I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. Today, we're talking about something I think a lot of us feel but don't always talk about, which is the late summer slump. That funny in-between time when the energy of spring sewing has faded, the heat makes you not want to touch a single piece of fabric, and fall feels just far enough away that you're not quite ready to dive in yet. So we're going to cover why this slowdown happens and why it's completely normal, how to stay connected to your creative practice even when you're not actively sewing, and how to use this quiet time to set yourself up for the most intentional, exciting fall sewing season you've ever had. All right, Haley, let's start with our icebreaker question. So tell me about a time when you took a break from sewing, whether it was planned or not, and what you came back to the machine with. So did you come back excited or feel rusty, or did anything shift for you?
I mean, I've taken quite a few sewing hiatuses over the years, some intentional, some not intentional. And I don't, from where I currently sit, I don't have judgment towards that, but I think that whenever I've had a hiatus, regardless of the reason I had it, I don't, when I come back to to sewing, I don't know if I feel like practically rusty. I feel like I come back with like a little bit of like maybe shame. I'm like, oh man, gosh, why did I take so long off? Like,
Yeah.
just like feeling a little bit like disconnected from it, almost in a spiritual way.
Yeah.
Where I'm like not worried that I'm not going to be able to sew in a straight line. It's just more like, oh gosh, like I don't feel like connected with this, and that makes me feel sad. I feel like that is for me my biggest obstacle whenever I've taken a hiatus. And I think that is because sewing and creating is a really important part of who I am, and it's an important part of my values and identity. And I think it's important. I've found for me that I have to commune with it in some way regularly.
Yeah. I feel that way too. And I think that's true for just about any creative hobby, that if you spend time away from it, sometimes you come back excited, or sometimes I have come back excited, but often I come back, yeah, you're right. It's like a feeling of being rusty, but not necessarily because you can't do it, but just more like there's a mental barrier there of some kind where you're not used to the feeling of being in that creative zone.
Yeah.
And so you feel like some kind of a emotional or mental barrier to doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it.
And I think that's why it's so important to have creative like rituals and practices for yourself, whether that's around sewing or whatever your creative hobbies are, because it's just so easy to get out of the swing of things.
Yeah.
For me, anyway. And having something that I do at a certain time or even every day is really, for me, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when I've taken breaks from sewing that are intentional breaks, I've been able to build that into my life in a different way so that I don't come back to the sewing machine with that block.
Yeah. I think that's also important if you do, especially if you take a break on purpose for any reason, like making sure that you have that. I've taken many breaks from sewing too, some long, some very short. Not in a while. I've been in a pretty good sewing group for the last few years. But I just echo everything you said about like kind of feeling disconnected when you don't do it for a while. And that's true of like my other hobbies, photography or drawing or whatever it is that I do. I think I feel the same way, or writing, all of it. Well, it was a great icebreaker for this episode. And if you have a question for us that we could use as an icebreaker in a future episode, you can leave it for us in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, or you can leave it in a comment on Spotify and we'll answer it in a future episode. We love hearing from you guys and hearing any questions that you have. Also love seeing your reviews. If you have time to give us a rating and review, it really helps other people to find the show. And before we get into our topic today, since we're talking about summer, I want to mention a quick housekeeping note, which is that Haley and I are taking our annual summer break after this episode so we can enjoy this really busy season. So we'll be back in about a month. So August 31st, I think, will be our next episode. And we'll have some new episodes for fall. We might be planning some new things for fall. We'll see. We're gonna be working on the podcast in the meantime and coming up with some new ideas. So we'll see what happens when we come back in about a month. And we'll see you then. But in the meantime, let's get into today's topic. So there's something that happens every year around this time that I've started to think of for myself as the August lull. The big summer projects are done or, they've been abandoned by this point. And I'm not quite ready to think about cozy fall fabrics just yet. And I think I used to feel a lot of guilt about it. Like if I'm not sewing, am I even really a sewist? Like, am I wasting all these patterns and all this fabric, or am I falling behind on my sewing? But the more I've talked to people in our community and really paid attention to my own patterns, the more I realize that it's just kind of a part of creative life. And creativity isn't a straight line. It also has seasons. So the problem isn't really the slowdown itself. The problem is what we do with it, or more specifically, what we tell ourselves about it. Because if we let the guilt spiral, we can come out of a sewing break feeling further from sewing than when we went in. So today, we want to just talk about this honestly, because I think the late summer slump is real for a lot of us. And there are some gentle, practical things we can do to stay connected to our creativity, even when we're not at the machine. So do you feel like there's a particular time of year when your sewing motivation tends to dip, Haley?
Definitely, I think that August or late July, early August can be a time that I see a slump for me. Another time that I notice it is I think I have kind of a natural one around the winter holiday season, just because life is really busy and I kind of give myself permission to set my sewing aside for a little bit to, live my life. But I do notice that after that season, that's often followed by an unintentional sewing hiatus because I find it hard to get back into the swing of things.
Yeah. I wonder if also, I feel like one thing for me in the summer is that, well, first of all, I'm busy in the summer. I just have a lot of other things I like to do in the summer. So there's that. I feel like there are kind of different motivations at other times of year. Like in the winter, there's often holidays and I want to do some holiday sewing or for events and things like that. In the fall, there's, maybe I want to make a new coat or, there's all the fall fabrics and everything. And I feel like at the end of summer, when you're still in the heat of it and it doesn't really feel like you're ready to transition to that season yet, it's just like there's not like something I'm moving forward towards yet.
Yeah.
So it feels a little bit like of a dead zone for me.
I totally agree with that. I think that also summer tends to be like a we tend to be more really practical in the way that we dress.
Yeah.
And I think that also is true for winter time. And I think that is also a pattern in those two times that I tend to have a slump, is that I'm dressing for very practical reasons. I'm my inspiration is a little bit more minimal. And I just have focus at other places. And those three things I think are kind of like the perfect storm for a little bit of a slump.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, in the winter, I definitely feel like I'm wearing kind of the same thing every day.
Yeah,
also.
Totally. You're like, I just want to
winter
be
and
warm,
summer.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's more practical and more uniform for me at those times of year.
What do you think is actually happening when we lose motivation, particularly mid-season? Do you think it's a boredom or burnout or something else? Does it feel different to you than a creative block?
Yeah, I think it's different for me. it doesn't really feel like a creative block to me. It feels like just more of like a little bit less interest overall
Mhm.
in clothing,
Yeah.
honestly. And it to me, it's more about like the end product is not as compelling to me at
Mhm.
that moment in time or that season.
Yeah.
And so that causes a little bit less motivation. I don't necessarily feel bored or burned out as much as just like this medium is not as compelling to me
Yeah.
as it is the rest of the year.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, it is a little bit of boredom.
Yeah. I guess that is kind of
Yeah.
boredom. Yeah.
And I mean, and like I was saying, I think it's for me, I feel that 100%. And it's also that like that combined with like a life being really busy in that
Mhm.
particular moment and having maybe it's easier to allow the other things to take priority.
Yeah.
My garden becomes far more interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing with well, you mentioned gardening, which is something I do a lot of also, and, there are certain things in the summer that have very real, like, time constraints
Yeah,
on
yeah.
them, like, I have to garden at certain times of day before it gets hot,
Mhm.
and things need to go in the ground at a certain time or get harvested at a certain time. So, I feel like you've got some weather, natural world constraints on the rest of your life
Yeah.
that might, also influence things a little bit.
Yeah, that's very true, especially when it comes to gardening.
Mhm.
I'm curious, when you're in one of those low motivation stretches, is there anything that you do that keeps you feeling like a creative person even if it's not sewing? Like what does staying connected actually look like for you in the day to day?
Mm. Well, I think, I mean, I always enjoy like collecting ideas for future sewing, even
Mhm.
if I'm not feeling like doing a lot of sewing at that moment. So that's one way that I still feel kind of connected to it. And then I always like playing with fabric, even if I'm not actually making a lot of clothing with it. I like doing little projects too, like
Mhm.
little accessories or even some quilting. I
Yeah.
think that's really fun, or home decor projects. And it makes me feel like I'm still using my hands and creating things with textiles without necessarily needing to add to my closet.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely lean into those a bit more during that season. I think too that I allow myself to see how all of my other creative pursuits feed into the same source,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
like the same well inside of me that drawing, even if I'm drawing like a flower that's growing in my garden,
Mhm.
is still like a thread that's connecting me to my creativity. Maybe it doesn't like relate directly to the things on my sewing queue, but it all I think like is nourishing in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think, um, they're just different media
Hmm.
for kind of whatever is inside of you that needs to come out, you know?
Yeah. And I think it can be easy to like feel like if I'm not working in this one medium that's maybe like my primary one, that I'm less of a creative person, I'm less than an artist. And I think
Mhm.
that, um, you can interrupt that narrative in a way.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, let's get into some of these like practical ways that you can ride out the slump and actually come out of the other side feeling like better. So, I'm going to kick us off with our first tip, which is to give yourself permission to stop, but intentionally.
Mhm.
I think that there's a really big difference between drifting away from sewing out of like guilt or avoidance and consciously deciding to take a break. I know that I have done both versions of this over the years. And I find that when you make it a choice, like I'm going to take 2 weeks off from my machine or I'm going to take a month off, that you take the shame out of it, then you're not like failing. You're making a choice to rest on purpose. You can kind of think of it like putting a book down before you finish it. You don't feel like guilty because you put a bookmark in and you put it on your bedside table. And you can kind of take that same mentality into your sewing. Some ideas that I have for making your break feel intentional are you can put a loose end date on it, mark your calendar. You can tell somebody in your sewing community or your partner. Having a little bit of accountability is always a useful tool. You can write down what you want to come back to so it feels less like abandonment and more like a bookmark. Sarah, do you think that sewists are particularly prone to guilt around taking breaks? And why do you think that is?
I think possibly yes. My experience, people who get into sewing, I think tend to be a little bit restless, maybe. Like you want to be making things all the time. You want to be creating. And sometimes there might even be a little bit of perfectionism around that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think taking breaks is a little bit anathema to people who are hyper productive in that way. Um, I think when you have a hobby that involves like producing stuff, it naturally tends to attract people who enjoy producing things
Yeah.
and making things. And so when you're not doing that, I think when you do that a lot, it can be almost like a little bit of a compulsion. And
Uh-huh.
if you're not making things, you don't really feel like yourself, which can be good or bad. I don't think there's any judgment around that, but it does tend to induce some guilt or some feelings of like things not quite being right when you're not being productive.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing, that I think that sewists tend to be really highly productivity focused. It's
Mhm.
like this blend of like having all of these ideas and this creative energy and also wanting to produce,
Yeah.
And when you're not sewing and you don't have anywhere to put that energy, then
Mhm.
what are you? Who are you? What are you
Yeah.
doing?
And that's why for me, I think it's really important to have other hobbies that are not around being productive necessarily, even if they involve making things
Mhm.
that are not necessarily productivity oriented or that I do just for the fun of doing them.
Mhm.
Um, like hiking, for example, for me is just something about being outside, is more about the process than it is about creating something. And I think it's helpful to have that balance in my life
Yeah,
as well.
totally. I feel like as I've matured and as I've collected more hobbies, that I've found that having that balance between the two types of hobbies has been really healthy for me.
Yeah. All right. Well, number two is to stay in the dreaming phase. So, sewing has a lot of phases. You've got like dreaming and then planning and then buying and making and wearing. And you don't have to be in the making phase to be an active creative person. So, the late summer slump is actually a wonderful time to be in that dreaming phase. Just flipping through patterns and saving ideas and getting curious about a new technique you've always wanted to try. I think of it a little bit like meal planning when you're not actually hungry. You just make better choices when you're not in the heat of the moment. So, some ways to stay in that dreaming phase are you could revisit your Pinterest boards, you could browse the Seamwork Pattern Library, or just sit quietly with a cup of tea and ask yourself, what would I really love to wear this fall? And I think this is actually the most fun and creative part of sewing is this like dreaming and planning stages of it.
Yeah. And utilizing that natural, the natural, ebbs and flows of your productivity to work into this more dreaming phase.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Our next tip is to do a low stakes creative experiment. I love doing this. Sometimes a slump hits because we've been working on really big and ambitious kinds of projects, and our brains just need something a little bit lighter to sink
Mhm.
our teeth into. So, a low stakes experiment um, can be really helpful here. So, this can look like using a scrap to find, just try a new seam finish, or make a muslin of something that maybe you've been a little bit nervous about, and you can treat it as an experiment and kind of take some of the pressure off. Or just sewing something tiny, a bag, a scrunchie, a pot holder, a pin cushion. The goal isn't the finished item necessarily. The goal is just to remember that sewing, the act of sewing in itself feels really good. And sometimes that we can forget that when we've been really like heads down in a difficult project for weeks. Think of it kind of like a warm-up sketch. If you're an artist, you don't think about making a masterpiece. That's like not the goal. You're just moving the pencil.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too. I think just having those like sketches, like you're saying, like is a really it's a really fun way to kind of stay in the flow of it and continue enjoying the process of like working with your hands, even if the thing is not all that ambitious. The next tip is to get your space and your stash in order because I think there's something just like really energizing about a clean and organized sewing space. So even if you're not feeling pulled to sew at the moment, sometimes the issue isn't necessarily motivation. It's just that your space has gotten really chaotic. This happens to me quite often. So a little bit of tidying, a bit of stash reorganizing, maybe washing and pressing some fabric you've been meaning to get to. All of that is sewing adjacent work that keeps you in the practice without requiring a lot of energy. And then the payoff when you do sit back down is you feel like you're walking into a fresh start. And plus, when you organize your stash, you almost always rediscover something that you forgot you had. And then you get that little spark of, oh, I want to make something with this. And it's exactly the kind of gentle motivation that gets you back to the machine. So I like to do that when I have like a free moment and can just like go into my shed and just get everything organized in order. Just makes me feel, it just feels good, you know?
Something about the sunshine makes me feel extra motivated to do this too.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it can be fun to just kind of like figure out new ways to keep everything labeled and organized and make sure that things are the way you need them to be.
Yeah. All right. Our next tip is to use this time to plan, like really, really plan. The biggest creative reset you can give yourself going into fall isn't a new pattern or like a fabric haul. In my opinion, it's a plan. And when you know what you're making and why you're making it, when the projects feel really connected to your actual life and the wardrobe that you actually want, sewing stops feeling like a hobby that you have to like get back into and starts feeling more like something that you're really genuinely excited about. And the late summer quiet is actually, I think, a really perfect time for this. You have a little distance from your spring projects. You can look back honestly with what you wore and you loved. And what you made and never reached for, and what you wish you had, and ask yourself, what do I actually need in my wardrobe this fall, and what would make getting dressed feel a little bit more like me? And that kind of intentional thinking is what can really transform sewing from feeling like a pastime into a more like creative practice.
Yeah. I think it's that like connection to who you are as a person that takes it over that bridge.
And I think it can like really help you to build up that motivation that you need like going into this next season.
And then tip number 6 is to connect with your sewing community. So when your own creative energy is low, other people's energy can carry you for a while. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a weakness. I think that's one of the main reasons community exists. To share a finished project, you can share even an old one, can be super motivating for getting kind of back into the feeling of sewing. You can also like comment on someone else's work, ask a question you've been too nervous to ask, show up to a sew along, even if you're not sewing along, just to see what other people are making. Creativity is really contagious in the best possible way. And sometimes all it takes to break a slump is really seeing someone else's excitement about what they're working on to remember why you fell in love with it in the first place. And I think this is like kind of an undervalued part of having any kind of hobby in general is connecting with the creative community that's around that hobby. I think that's really vital and one of the key benefits of having a hobby is finding other people who are kind of like part of your tribe, who understand um, why you love this thing that you love.
Yeah, I think it can be really easy to lose track of, though, in a hobby like sewing that can feel so solitary, like the practice in itself can
Uh-huh.
feel really solitary, that I think a lot of the times people can underestimate
Uh-huh.
how vital community can be, even in your most solitary creative pursuits.
Yeah. All right, well, let's bring this all together. So, we talked about how the late summer slowdown is a completely normal part of creative life, not a sign that something's wrong with you or with your practice. And we shared 6 ways to move through it gently. Give yourself permission to stop intentionally and not with guilt. Stay in the dreaming phase because remember that planning is creative work too. Try a low stakes experiment to remember why you love sewing. Get your space and stash in order. A fresh environment can really spark some fresh energy. Use this quiet time to really plan your fall sewing and lean into your community when your motivation is running low. All right, what's your takeaway from all of this, Haley?
I think my takeaway is to listen to what your slump is telling you. Is this like a busy season where you need to plan accordingly? Maybe you need less projects in your sewing queue for next summer. Um, or maybe like the projects you chose like just aren't inspiring you. I think that these are all really like relevant findings that you can carry with you into the next season and into the next year. And I think that when we can treat this information like data,
Hmm.
and we could have a lot less shame around our slumps.
Yeah. I think for me, what I think is important is just noticing patterns over time
Mhm,
and both in, seeing what works for you when you're in a sewing slump, but also just noticing when those slumps tend to occur.
mhm.
Maybe there are certain times of year that just happen to be really, really busy for you just because of your life. And those are the times you want to kind of plan to have a little bit of a slump. Um, for me, I know that summer is definitely a time when I have a slump. So I know that that's coming and I plan to do fewer projects and plan to do easier projects. And that's what works for me. But I think just noticing those patterns over time throughout the year can be really, really helpful and kind of the first step to avoiding the guilt and shame that can come from not doing the things that you want to do. Um, it's weird that we put so much like heaviness around the things that we actually want to do,
I know.
but I certainly do, and that's something that I'm trying to work with. So hopefully, some of these ideas have been helpful for you guys too. So, we talked a lot today about the power of planning and how a little intentional thinking about your fall wardrobe can completely transform your sewing season. So, I want to tell you about something that makes that process really easy. If you don't have it already, we've put together the free Seamwork wardrobe planning kit, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's everything you need to create a customized plan for your next season of sewing all in one place. So it includes our free wardrobe planner with pages for sketching looks and planning individual projects with swatches, thinking through your whole seasonal vision. And it comes with essential tips to help make sure you're sewing a wardrobe you'll actually wear, not just things that sound exciting in the fabric store. It's free and it's printable, and spending an hour with it at the end of the summer is one of the best things you can do for your fall sewing. So you can download it at seamwork.com/go/free dash planner. And if you want to take that planning process even further and do it alongside a community of sewists who are all working towards the same goal, our Design Your Wardrobe fall session is coming up soon, and signups are open right now. So, Design Your Wardrobe is our most popular program, and it walks you through a complete process of designing a full season's worth of projects with guidance and structure and a group of fellow sewists cheering you on the whole way. So, you can do it either as a self guided program or you can join us live for the group course, which is coming up soon. So you can learn more and you can sign up at seamwork.com/go/DYW. So that's seamwork.com/go/DYW. And if you like this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you guys, and it also really helps other people to find the show. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to become part of the Seamwork community, head over to seamwork.com to learn how to join. And that's it for us this week. I'm Sarai.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio.